Good morning, everyone. At least night for Katie. So this is the second episode of the Modern Salon Podcast. So I have a guest with me, Katie. And first, can you introduce yourself, Katie? Just so everyone.
Yeah, I am Katie Sulatycki. I guess I do philosophy on Instagram. I'm trying to make it more practical, accessible, and fun. Can I include my Instagram name? Is that
Yeah.
okay?
That's
You can check me out at I'm Katie Sula Exists. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed while looking at your Instagram, and I've been a follower for a couple of months.
Oh, have you?
Yeah. So one of the things that I noticed is that you're a quite fond with absurdism, right?
Yes.
Yes. So how do you define absurdism? Like, what is the definition of it? What do you think it is?
Oh, I wish I prepared for this so I could, tell you exactly what it is. I think of absurdism. But for me, absurdism has always been it's always been a big part of who I am and philosophy. And for me, one of the things I've always liked about it is Camus, he's the big absurdist. Like if we're thinking about where the term comes from and absurdist philosophy, everyone is pretty familiar with Camus. So for me, the absurd, it's really that, oh God, if I can remember, it's part of the human condition. So it's that realization that everything is meaningless, but deciding to live in spite of that. That's kind of where that what the absurd is. So I mean, with existentialists, they're all about creating meaning, but I still ascribe meaning to things. I create meaning, but it's on top of that realizing that it still is fundamentally and ultimately meaningless.
Yeah, that's interesting because I don't prescribe to these notions of what I like to call isms, like let's say existentialism, conservatism. Like I don't prescribe to these notions, but most people would consider me an existentialist as I tend to create I don't know if it's quite the existentialist as Sartre put it, but more like what Nietzsche put forward, right? The what he called the Ubermensch. Like I strive towards that ideal. Obviously, I'm not the Ubermensch by any means, but I strive towards that ideal, like of creating one's own values and stuff, right?
That's what it is, though. I don't think there is really a disconnect or anything between Sartre's conception of existentialism and Nietzsche's Übermensch. That's essentially what it is. That so when you think about Sartre, when you think about Nietzsche and do you know? Are you familiar with the camel analogy, like the metaphor?
Yeah. Camel, three metamorphoses. Yeah.
Yeah. That's essentially what that is. It's the cycle of nihilism and coming out the other end with a more existentialist approach, like creating your own values and being in the world in a sense with a sense of awe or wonder. But I don't know, I've always found that a lot of people I feel like it's pretty known that a lot of people misinterpret Nietzsche and think he was an actual nihilist. But it's the opposite, which is what he's advocating for.
Like my other host has entered the waiting room, so I'll just admit it. All right. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyways. Yeah. Okay. Give me a second.
Yeah. No worries.
Give me a second. Sneha, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. We've already started recording, so it should be fine. Yeah. So yeah. So you do you want to get into the conversation? We were just talking about how Nietzsche's version of existentialism is quite similar to what Sartre said and all that.
Okay, I'm kind of quite losing it.
Yeah.
What was that?
Yeah, I couldn't actually hear what she said. this is not quite the most professional podcast.
That's okay.
Like,
I mean,
Hello. Am I audible now? Hello.
yeah, you're audible. You're audible. Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, it's not like my Instagram is the most professional like philosophy
Yeah.
thing on Instagram.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think she's online.
Perfect.
Yeah. So we were just talking about how, as I said before, like what Nietzsche's conception of like existentialism and Sartre's was actually quite similar to each other, right? And yeah, you were talking about the three metamorphoses, right? The camel, the lion, and the child, right? Yeah. So that's very interesting because to me, like it's quite interesting in the sense that Nietzsche, when I read Nietzsche, I don't know if it's because I what do you call it? If I missed this point, right? But one of the things Sartre says is that man is fundamentally responsible for everything, right? Everything, not just his actions and or whatever he does. He's responsible for every other actions, every other human being thinks, or even for that matter, if you go as far to say every conscious entity thinks. You can even go to that extreme, right? And that's an interesting idea because, like, what do you think about that? Being responsible for every single human.
Yeah. So when Sartre says that, when he talks about responsibility, he's essentially. So have you read Existentialism is a Humanism?
Yeah.
Okay. So then you probably know that he's essentially trying to make existentialism ethical or moral to an extent, because that's generally a big criticism of existentialism, is people say, oh, well, it's not like grounded in morality, or it doesn't have like any ethical piece to it. So Sartre he essentially takes the categorical imperative, or like, Kantian ethics, and tries to bring that into his notion of existentialism, to show like, no, like existentialism, like just because we are acknowledging that everything is meaningless and we're, aiming or striving to create our own meaning, it doesn't mean that it has to be necessarily like selfish or focused on just the individual. It is still something that can have that can be rooted in ethics. So I've personally liked it. I've always liked that piece of existentialism, but I'm also I'd consider myself a little bit of a deontologist.
Yeah. So that's interesting in the sense that, like, I think even if we take morality out of the equation, if we suppose, let's say, even if we go as far as to say that go as far as to state moral relativism, so to speak, I think still we have this responsibility part of the equation. This is kind of the argument that I have formulated about it, right? So basically, there are infinite possibilities.
Yes.
Infinite possibilities, and suppose, let's say, an event A occurs, and instead we would prefer that if an event B occurred, right? So there is a possibility that you could have changed that event A to an event B. So fundamentally, it doesn't matter like whether it is statistically probable to do this event or not, since there is infinite possibilities, because we never know whether we did that, because we can go back and change it and all that stuff. So fundamentally, you had chance to change this event A, event B, and you are in some way responsible. That's kind of the argument that I formulated to justify it. What do you think about that? What is the kind of like the fallacy?
I'm not actually, so that's actually really interesting, because I'm not sure I agree with that at all. And mostly because, it's interesting you bring that up, because today I did my video on, so for anyone who doesn't know what I do like 60-second philosophy videos on Fridays, where I break down philosophical concepts to try to make philosophy more like accessible, practical, fun, that kind of thing. And today I talked about normative ethics. And one of the main like theories in normative ethics is, of course, deontology, like Kantian ethics, with the categorical imperative and everything. And a big piece of that, so Kantian ethics versus, we can contrast it with utilitarianism to kind of understand it a little bit better. But deontology is action-based, whereas utilitarianism is consequence-based. So it doesn't matter, like if we're following the categorical imperative, like deontology, which is what Sartre uses in his like version of existentialism, it's not about the outcome. So sure, we are responsible for our choices and the outcome that we make for ourselves, but ultimately it's also about like the actual choice. We're making ethical decisions based on our actions and what we perceive is the right or moral actions versus what we perceive the outcome to be. Like if that makes sense.
Okay, so essentially we're taking this choice, we're making this choice essentially based on what we think is moral, right? What we think is right. Okay, so that's interesting in the sense that not all people, like, I mean, this is quite rare.
And I guess I should say that it's not it's what we ought to do. So that is also the big differentiator between like normative versus like prescriptive, or sorry, normative versus descriptive ethics, is that descriptive ethics is what we think we should do, like our beliefs around that, and prescriptive or normative ethics is about what we ought to do. So I guess I should rephrase that it's about like what we ought to do as rational beings.
Okay, that's interesting in a sense. So what I want to ask you is that, do you believe that there is something that we ought to do instead of what we think we should do?
Yeah, I mean, I do, like I mentioned, I do kind of follow the categorical imperative in deontology, which is based on like what we ought to do. So at least from my experience and understanding, it's more about evaluating ethical or moral dilemmas from as a reasonable being rather than assessing or looking critically at options with like the bias of my beliefs. It's about like, you know, what a rational person would do, what you would do, like what objectively makes sense. And it doesn't always make sense or work out that way. Like you know, a big criticism of Kant is of course the oh god, it's like the murderer counter argument. Like, are you familiar with that? Yeah.
No, actually not. I haven't read that much Kant.
Oh no, that's okay. So a popular criticism of Kant, or like, you know, his ethics at least, is that he says like you should always tell the truth. So then a counter argument is, okay, so if you are somewhere and your friend is being pursued by a murderer and your friend is hiding and the murderer comes up to you and says like, hey, where is John? Like Kant was never actually given this example or this counter argument. So, but it's just according to like, you know, his ethics, it would, to never tell a lie, it would be you're morally obligated to tell the truth and tell the murderer where John is, even though you know the murderer is intending to kill him.
Yeah. So, see, I think that's very interesting in the sense that like Kant prescribe like if I remember correctly, categorical imperative is about it's kind of like do to other people what you want to be done to yourself, kind of like that, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of like the golden rule. Yeah, like an updated version of that. So like treat others how you want to be treated.
Yeah,
essentially. And then universalize it.
Yeah. So that's interesting in the sense that I think it depends on the fact that is moral, let's say, objectivism even possible, right? That like, can we look the world in like an objective sense? Because fundamentally, I think we can only perceive the world in what we call in a subjective sense, right? We cannot look at it objectively because as a conscious being, I don't think that's possible. But so how does that play into this, right? How does like moral objectivism, how can we as subjective beings make the claim that moral objectivism is possible, right?
Yeah, no, it is difficult because then if you like, I think about this a lot and I don't know the answers, but I do think about how it's like, can anything really be universal? Everything we interpret in the world is essentially from our subjective experience. Even when people talk about removing yourselves or bracketing yourself off from your experience to view something objectively, can we ever actually view something objectively? Can we completely remove ourselves from like our lived experience and like our preconceived like notions and ideas and biases? Like, I'm not sure we can.
Yeah, and this is this is an interesting topic because I personally have like an argument of sorts, because fundamentally we come to these things like solipsism and all that stuff. If you think through this a lot, right? And personally, I have come with it like, is this person that I'm talking to even conscious, right? Like I don't know that clearly, but there is something of an argument, and I want to pick your brain a little bit, right?
Sure.
Regarding this argument. So there is this thing called empirical entities. This is just something I created. I don't know if this is even the right word for it.
Say it
right?
again, empirical
Entities.
Empirical entities, okay.
Okay, or we can even say axiomatic entities, right? So basically, this is the definition. I have a mathematics background, so I have rigorized this in a way that mathematics makes sense. So bear with me for a second. So entities are defined as anything and everything, right? You take anything, any idea, concept, abstraction, anything, an object, everything is an entity. Now, what is an empirical entity? Empirical entity is an entity that is common to every single conscious being. Okay, so here's how I aim to prove it. So I make the claim that, let's say, exist is an empirical entity. Right? I make the claim that, suppose, let's assume that is not the case. So there is at least one conscious being that refutes the existence of exist, right? But to refute the existence of exist, you have to know what exist means. So you say, like, in my mind, the concept of exist does not exist. That's a contradiction. Like, I don't know how logically true this is. This is just like an argument that I came up with. I don't know, because I'm literally 16, so it's quite weird.
That's fair.
Yeah. So and most of the new ideas fundamentally are not good enough. So what do you think about that? What is your response to that kind of?
That, like, of empirical entities, or
yeah, like this proof, what I like to call a proof of this. Is there any logical, is it wrong logically? Like, logically speaking, is it something wrong, or is it right, or whatever it is? What do you think about that?
So it's funny. The first thing I think of is actually, have you read much Aristotle?
No, actually not. I wanted to read a couple of things, but I keep putting it off, for like. So
it's difficult to know where to start, but if you do want to check out Aristotle, I recommend like reading his Metaphysics. I think it's like book 9 or something. But it's really funny, like the way you described it, because it reminded me of Aristotle's Metaphysics and how he was trying to like, he talks about the essence of a thing and tries to like figure out what like these essences that are like things that kind of like they can be thought of as characteristics or attributes, like universal things that all like all humans or all like things of a certain class would have. Like the way you kind of described the empirical like axiom or like entity, it just made me think of that, like trying to figure out like what exactly is the essence of like humans, what makes us human, what is actually universal or constant like among us, if anything.
Yeah. So like my more like the more specific question to it is like, is there any fallacy with this kind of argument, right? Because fundamentally what I've done is that I have approached it from like a mathematical perspective. Like, I've used the proof techniques usually used in mathematics and stuff. And is there any logical, is it a logical fallacy to think of it this way?
So go through it again for me.
So basically,
and I won't lie, it's been a while since I've like studied argumentation or fallacies, but I'll do my best.
Yeah. So essentially we have this claim that exist is an empirical entity, and fundamentally I do think in some level it is possible to disprove this effect, because like we still don't have an objective language of sorts. Like, language is completely contextual. Like, even Wittgenstein tried to create like an objective sort of framework in logical practice philosophies, right? And so here's the argument again. I claim that exist is an empirical entity, right? I claim that exist is an empirical entity. Now, by definition, empirical entities are entities that are common to all conscious beings. So if this isn't true, that means there is at least one conscious being that refutes the existence of exist in his or her mind or consciousness or whatever it is, right? So to refute the existence of exist, you have to know what the concept of exist actually means, right? So it's kind of like that. It's kind. I remember like this argument.
So you're saying that someone can refute this?
Someone cannot refute this, right?
Oh, cannot refute it. Okay, that's what I was confused about. I can't speak from like a fallacy or like argument structure way, because again, it's been a while. I'm like rusty on that. But it seems logical to me as of right now. Yeah, because you can't, if you understand like the actual definition of what it means to exist, then you would be you would understand that you can't refute it, because you would know that you are in existence. In order to refute it, you have to be in existence. The only thing that I might refute or like might be problematic is your definition of it. So what was your definition of the empirical and like it's something that everyone has universally, right?
Yeah, every conscious being has
every conscious being. Yeah. So my issue with that definition is that empirical is generally something that is observable like through experience, right? And sure, existence is something that is observable through experience. Like we have experience that we exist. We can kind of like see that other things, you know, also have that property of existence. But I'm not sure that I'm trying to think if there are, not all qualities of, I have to think about this, whether or not all qualities of conscious beings are empirical, or if there are qualities which are not empirical.
Perhaps I should have changed the wording a little bit. Perhaps a better way to define would be axiomatic entities, right? So
okay, yeah.
I think that would be better. That's better. That's better. Yeah. Yeah.
And this is one of those things with philosophers too. It's a lot of it comes down to definitions, because if we don't have the same definitions, then we might not be talking about the right thing. So it's
yeah, exactly. So that's kind of the argument. Like this has been this has been a problem for me for a while, because it's almost like, suppose there is not like this ultimately comes down to kind of like a solipsism. Like what if I'm the only conscious mind in the universe, and what if the reality that I perceive is not, let's say, objective, at least it's not universal, right? What if it is not universal, and how do I believe science in that case? What if the scientific method is false? Like we actually don't have a proof of if the scientific method is true, right? Basically, go on.
No, I was just going to say, so like I remember being like a teenager and thinking about all of these things and like really kind of getting hung up on it, and because there are big questions, and they if you don't know how to handle it, like it can really kind of like ruin you and throw you into like nihilism. It can be scary.
Yeah.
Oh, go on.
Yeah, it was like I actually went through like a nihilistic phase a year ago. It was almost like
everyone does. That's part of the human condition. But go on.
Yeah, it was like for 1 year straight, I was 1.5 years I was straight into nihilism, and the only way that I came out of it was through reading people like Nietzsche, Sartre, and even Camus, right? I read them, and it kind of made me feel better. But I still have this question of why is the scientific method true? Like, suppose, let's say we have this hypothesis, we make logical conclusions from it, we reach a final conclusion. Okay, that's fine. That's all good. Everything is good. But the problem is this conclusion. We observe this conclusion in the world, right? We observe this conclusion in the world. How do we know this conclusion is actually what we observe? Like, how do we determine the equality of things, right? How do we see if our perception of this event is actually the event itself? What if let's say it's an event A, right? Let's say it's an event A. And what if it was actually an event B that we perceived as an event A. It runs into all kinds of problems, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And honestly, I would say that it comes down to, because this is the thing, I used to get caught up on this a lot when I was younger, and still sometimes I do. But it's learning to be okay with the ambiguity of existence. Like, not everything has an answer. Like, that's one of the big things about philosophy. Like, Aristotle talks about this, Heidegger talks about this, that even though philosophy, it is the love of knowledge, the love of truth, but at the end of the day, it's pursuing philosophy while knowing that we will never actually arrive at the answer we want to get at. We will never actually arrive at anything close to objective truth. Like, we keep pursuing it, hoping for it because we love the investigation. But it's knowing that we can never actually get there. And that's a big part of it. Like, as humans, I think we're obsessed with trying to find these objective or factual statements about us, trying to like figure out who we are or what we are. And we just like keep hoping that, if we like find this next answer, like it will unlock everything else and like give us like the truth or whatever it is. But we can never actually arise at it. Sometimes in existence, it is kind of taking a sort of leap of faith about it.
Yeah, that's interesting in the sense that like, I do think that that's most probably what I'm going to be doing rather than investigating this stuff. Yeah, but it's kind of interesting to me in the sense that these questions, right? These questions about fundamental truths. I think it depends on each person, each philosopher who pursues it, right? Because, for example, for me, I think if I can somehow create an argument for whether scientific truth is correct or not, if I can somehow create it, and I don't think that is quite possible, but still, if potentially, hypothetically, I could create that, I would be fine with the rest of it, because if science was true, then for me personally, it would be fine, because like science is true. Well, we should just say that, okay, science is true and believe science, right? Or since we already have an argument, so it's not actually believing. So my point being is that most philosophers, and each and every one of these philosophers, have like different ideas and different conceptions on what they need to prove, right? So yeah, it is quite interesting, and I noticed that it comes to the absurdist notion that you talked about earlier. Like, we're investigating even after knowing that we can't find the truth, right? It's kind of relates to that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the absurdist piece essentially. Like, so as humans, we're constantly looking for meaning, right? So it's the absurd is essentially the contradiction between trying to look for meaning and eventually realizing that we can never, like, there is no inherent meaning in existence. Like, you can create your own, but you also know that fundamentally it is meaningless. But instead of falling into a state of nihilism, you like find a way to embrace that and kind of like keep on living in spite of it, and actually, find a way to derive joy from it. And at the same time, like, just because everything is meaningless, it doesn't mean that like everything is fundamentally meaningless. There's no like intrinsic or universal meaning. But just because of that, it doesn't mean we shouldn't, pursue these things. Like, if you want to find a way to, create proofs for the scientific method, like, part of being ascribing to like absurdism, or actually like living it, is doing that in spite of knowing that it's fundamentally meaningless. Because like, maybe you do derive joy from it, maybe it's just like your passion project, like whatever, it's going for it and doing it. Like, that's a big part of philosophy. This was one of my professors said this, and I always enjoyed it, that in philosophy, like, sure, none of what the philosophers say is necessarily like objectively correct. But there are working models or working theories or methods. And maybe it's the same way in science as well. But it doesn't mean we scrap it or anything, but we should only tear things down if we have something better to replace it with. Like, it kind of makes me think of, again, like Nietzsche's three metamorphoses. Like how I believe it's the lion, right? The second one?
Lion, yeah.
Yeah. It's like how the lion, all it can do is destroy and destroy and destroy. It can't create. And that's where the child comes in. It's the same thing with philosophy. Sure, not everything is perfect, but we shouldn't be completely tearing it down and getting rid of it unless we are able to put something better in its place. Because it still is about progress. It's still about, like making things better, whatever that might mean.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And I think it's like currently what I believe in is kind of like a postmodernist view of the of reality as a whole. Like these events have an infinite number of interpretations, and each interpretation, we cannot deem which is necessarily better or worse than the other. So it's kind of like that. And that's one of the things that I want to ask you. What do you think about postmodernism in general, right?
I guess, well, how are you defining it? Because there's a lot of different.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm defining it in the sense that there are infinite interpretations of any finite events, right? And
So
we
say
cannot
that again. There are
infinite interpretations of any
okay.
any number of finite events, or infinite events for that matter. So there are infinite number of interpretations of an event. Let's give it that, right? And we cannot deem necessarily which is better or worse objectively in the objective sense, right? And I think that like postmodernism also comes with the it also relates to all the stuff about power relations and power, how analyzing how power as a method oppresses people in society, and how there are the oppressed and the oppressors and all that stuff. But fundamentally, I think it boils down to this idea of this infinite interpretation from what I've learned. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? Yeah.
Sorry, my dog is a little barky right now.
Yeah. That's fine.
Did you have anything else to add, or is that about?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay. I won't lie. Again, it's been a while since I've really kind of like dived into postmodernism, but I'm not really necessarily against it or anything. I've only noticed that as I've like retained more life experience and gotten older, I've slowly, I feel like I've fallen into the idea that everything is kind of subjective and relative, and there are a million different ways of interpretation. And
yeah,
I feel like in a way, maybe it makes me more wishy-washy, but I think of it as making me more okay with like the overall ambiguity of existence.
Yeah, that's like one of the things that I personally believe in is this philosophy of relativism and subjectivism. And somehow, like, there is still a part of me that wishes, like, I don't mind having a subjective way of navigating through the stuff, right? I don't mind that. But I would prefer if there were objective reality surrounding it. Like, there is a universal reality, and we had all these subjective ways of navigating through it. That's kind of what I feel like I would be comfortable with, you know? Yeah.
It is, I don't know, just in general existence, like the human experience, the human condition is very complicated and confusing and contradictory, which they are weird statements to make, since it is something that we all go through. Like, humans have been around for how many? I'm bad at anthropology, so I'm not going to attempt to like hundreds of that. Is it like hundreds of thousands of years, or
I don't know exactly.
Like I don't even know.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It is. I don't know. It's really kind of interesting to kind of dive into like the different interpretations of reality and existence, and what make like. I don't know how much you've been exposed to like postmodern like philosophy and literature.
Yeah, I've not been that much exposed to that. I've read like a couple of Foucault and Lacan and some Derrida and all that stuff. So it's kind of like, it's not that much, but I know a little bit.
Okay.
Just like the surface, surface level stuff. Yeah.
No, of course. But no, it is interesting to kind of, I don't know, I just have like a million thoughts right now that I'm trying to like process and like figure out which direction to go into.
Yeah.
So I apologize. But I vaguely recall like looking at like reading, oh God, what was it? We read one of Foucault's books when I was an undergrad. And I actually really loved how, I think it was Discipline and Punish, or I think it was actually excerpts of Discipline and Punish and The History of Madness. And it still sticks with me today, like what he wrote about like the like institutional, like how institutions have like used power or exerted power over like the power dynamics.
Yeah.
I remember him talking about like how the prison systems and educational systems actually use very similar structures of power.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it's never kind of left me. It's been with me ever since like taking that class like a decade ago.
Yeah, that's I relate with that a lot because for me personally, education institutions are not exactly my friend, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. Like people who are interested in philosophy or like any sort of like who are interested in an inquiry and are interested in like non-conventional methods of like knowledge or like investigation or whatever, they don't always they're not always well suited for the educational system. Like I've always been a very like curious person. And I remember like being like scolded, like, and I've always been like a little bit, you know, like different as well. And I remember like being scolded like for that non-conformity in schools. Like I remember, and I brought this up with my professor who taught me Foucault in university when we were talking about like those power dynamics, especially like with teachers, how they are essentially like exerting like power and control over like their students and like taking out, you know, their unresolved like issues or trauma out on you.
Yeah.
But like I have like vivid memories of like grade school of like, you know, like that happening. And it's kind of like crazy how like that is, it's just part of, it's accepted. People don't question it. Like these, like the power dynamics in institutions and like the effect that they have on like developing minds.
Yeah, it is quite interesting because like even if you like, this is one of the things that I do, right? I don't know if I'm supposed to say this out loud and if they'll do something about it, about it school. But here's the thing: even if you hypothetically get like good grades and stuff, they still won't allow you to kind of like do what you want. Like suppose this is something that I do a lot, and I think it should fundamentally result in like, I think the purpose of school is fundamentally to create this sense of curiosity and this sense of inquiry into young minds. And I think it's quite complicated in the sense that I do believe that every issue is quite complex if you think about it and just think it through, right? And one of my personal beliefs is that you should only have exams. You shouldn't force people to take classes and stuff. That's one of my beliefs. If you're going to prescribe to this notion of school, right? If you're going to prescribe to this traditional conventional notion of school, why not just let people take the exams if they can do it, right? It's not like it's not like it's your responsibility or anything that you should they should pass or something, right? You should not consider it like a fault of yours. Essentially, they're deciding, okay, I want to go to I want to only take the exams. I don't want to hear the lectures and stuff. And I think I don't know if that's the practice in Western societies, but not necessarily in India. In India, it's quite like you have to go to every class, you have to do every assignment, even if you can take the exams without them, right? It's like,
no, I think it is similar here, at least with my experience. It was a lot of, you know, like you have to check all the boxes, you have to do all of like the different requirements that the teacher or professor like says you have to like meet that, you know, like the requirements or whatever. Sometimes you'll be lucky and have like a teacher who, you know, will let it slide. Like I remember I had one teacher in high school who I was doing well in his class and he liked me, so he'd like kind of let me get away with things. But it's definitely not the norm. Definitely not.
Yeah, it's like I almost felt like on a 2-minute rant there about the systems and all that.
That's
stuff.
okay. It's true though, and it's crazy to me because like those are, especially like in grade school, like those are developmental years. Even in high school as well, like those years are very impactful for you. Like, sure, I don't remember a ton about high school anymore because it's like I'm 30.
Yeah.
So I don't remember a ton of high school anymore, but I remember like how I felt during it, or like how like the impact it had on me. Like those things never go away. So when you have like these rules of power, like these institutions, like the way that they kind of like shape young minds, like it can have detrimental effects.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the things, like I think why I resonate with the postmodernists, so to speak, is that I kind of have this experience, but at the same time, one of the things that I criticize about not just postmodernists, but everything that tries to boil this events down to one single factor, right? So for postmodernists, it was just power, right? And I think it's more about having these. There are multiple variables at play, right? Here, rather than focusing on a single one, I think we should deem to analyze multiple variables that are at play and analyze any event in that manner, however complex that may be, right? Yeah, so that's kind of what I was thinking. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say because at the end, like everything does typically have multiple like ways you can look at it, or multiple like reasons for like why a thing happened. But I'm not completely against like if we are saying that for Foucault it all comes down to power, I'm not necessarily against like that idea. Like sure, there are other like nuanced pieces of it. But I think a lot of it is this like weird power struggle that humans have trying to like exert over each other because, and it's typically, at least from my experience, because they've been in a position of like power being exerted over them. And it's just people repeating like similar patterns of behavior, like just perpetuating it and not breaking it.
Yeah. That's quite interesting in the sense that like this is something that that one of the things that I struggle with, or so to speak, is the fact that the contrast with the personal experience and with a theoretical inquiry to stuff, right? So from my personal experience, I have felt like the society is fundamentally built upon power relations, but at the same time, when you look into stuff, when you think it more like outside what your personal experience dictates, so to speak, you get these ideas on, you get these interpretations on what could the reason potentially be. Like, is it some of our personality traits and all that stuff, right? Not just personality trait, that's like an example for it, right? So is it due to these variables, or is it due to the interrelatedness of multiple variables, so to speak, right? So that contrast is very interesting for me, so to speak, yeah.
No, it is. It is like again, and it kind of does come back to. I feel like I'm repeating myself a little bit, so I apologize. But it does come back to that sort of ambiguity, like the fact that we will never know, like a definitive answer to a lot of these things.
Yeah, like that's one of the things. Personally, I feel like the ambiguity of existence is something, or the fact that we will never know about things, right? We will never know the answers to things. It's kind of been hard for me to accept it because I don't know. Fundamentally, I think I'm more like I consider myself to be a person who wants to find the truth no matter what, right? It's kind of like perhaps I'm hardwired that way, but it's kind of hard.
No, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Even though I'm more comfortable with the ambiguity, like I still want to keep going for it, even though like I know I may never find it. And like that's like the key to engaging with and pursuing philosophy. But go on. Sorry.
Yeah. So as I was saying, like the thing is that these what do you call? What's the word I'm looking for? I'm looking for like, the thing is that I have these hardwired things in my brain, like that tell me to go forward to find the truth. At the same time, there is this I don't know if there's like a rigorous logical proof of this, but there is quite, and most probably this is going to be the situation, that we will never find the answers. There is this contradictory nature to existence itself, right? And what happens if we actually prove that is the case? And I don't even know if we can prove it, because that in itself would be a contradiction, right? If we prove that there is a contradiction and all that stuff. But yeah, it is quite like quite interesting to see the contrast between what we do and what the nature of it ultimately is, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and you might find this because did you say you're 16?
Yeah, 16, yeah.
Yep. And you might find this. Like, I remember, like, that was kind of when I was a teenager, when I kind of started to realize my interest in philosophy and everything. But you may also find that, like, I don't know about for you, but my experience, again, with all of this was that feeling of, like, you start to feel alone when you pursue the truth and start, like, inquiring into, like what is existence, like what is reality, what is truth. When you start inquiring into these things, like most of the people around us in society, you know, they're just going through the motions of existence, of life, because that's what we've been taught to do. Like when we were talking about how the education system doesn't necessarily it doesn't reward or really encourage us to be curious in that way. It's usually like, oh, like don't pursue that, that's pointless. When I decided to pursue philosophy, most people that I knew tangentially or like acquaintances were like, oh, why would you do that? That has no applicable or practical use like in anything in existence. And I'm like, but is it not? Is it not like, are you not curious about inquiring or investigating like the fundamental aspects of like the human condition, like asking those questions about like, even if we will never know the answers, like just asking those questions of like, why are we here? Like, what is existence? What is, like, you know, all of those questions, like what is reality or truth?
Yeah, that's like that's like that relates to me a lot, because I feel like, in the sense that I'm a person who literally doesn't have any friends. Perhaps due to this, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's due to that, but like, I can relate to that in the fact that it's like I almost have nothing interesting to talk about to most people, right? I don't have anything interesting to talk about to most people, and it's mutual, right? It's like I don't I normally don't feel interested in anything they have to say, and they don't feel interested in what I have to say. And it's kind of mutual. It's reciprocal, and I think that that's quite a contrast in the sense that if you look at these people who have tried to inquire about this, you see this same trend, right? You see the same pattern in them as well. So I feel like that is quite interesting. Yeah.
No, it's true. And like, I will say, when I was a teenager, it was kind of the same thing. There are a few people who've reached out to me like in recent years to tell me like they really appreciated like the way I'd kind of go about things, or how I kind of got them to think about, you know, life like more in depth. But like in high school, like I also, like, you know, I didn't have a lot of friends. I was interested in like philosophy and death and all of these things. And most people at that age, they're not interested in that. They don't want to, you know, be thinking about those things. And even now, you know, like I do have like, and I'm speaking about this more so to kind of like help normalize it and make others, hopefully signal to others that like this happens when you want to pursue philosophy. Like not everyone is interested in it. Not everyone is kind of like built for it in a way. And it does kind of ostracize you a little bit from, you know, friends and family, because they don't understand why you're so, you know, like obsessed or passionate about, you know, finding, like pursuing these answers that, or pursuing these questions that don't have answers. So it comes with the territory. But it is also a part of the human condition, at least in my opinion. Like there are a lot of people think this is unique to them. Like they feel like an outcast or lost or like misunderstood because it's mostly because they haven't found those other people who are also in the same camp as them, who are also experiencing this and are interested. But like there are a lot of people out there. It's just, it's seen, I don't know about in like your culture, but over here in the West, like I feel like it is a little bit taboo to, you know, like be, you know, to talk about those things publicly, and to kind of like want to start dialogues. Like people aren't really interested in it if it's not, you know, helping with, you know, like productivity or like, you know, money, capitalism or whatever. Like they don't want to have to think about like their existence or be confronted with like death or meaninglessness. They just want to like go through life and, you know, do the things that make them, you know, that they were told from childhood that like that denotes success. It's like, oh, you know, like go to a good school, get a good job, like get married, you know, become XYZ, like retire. A lot of people just don't think beyond that. And I think it's like, I don't know why. I can guess. I don't know if it's because people are scared, or maybe some people like literally just, maybe some people just aren't interested in it. But there are a lot of people who are. So I know, like, you know, especially when you're young, you might feel that, you know, like being ostracized from your friends, but you're not alone.
Yeah, it is like it is in the sense that, let's say, even if it's quite in the sense that even if I get like alone and even if I don't get friends, it's in the sense that I think this drives a much greater passion for it. Like even like one of the things that I quite enjoy is two things that I quite enjoy is philosophy and mathematics, because fundamentally both are modes of searching for the truth, right? So what is true? What is like what is existence? And even in mathematics, you have these systems like piano axioms and stuff, which fundamentally build this mathematics from the ground up. It builds the entire systems that we have in place, the systems that run the world. And why are these piano axioms true in and of itself? And all these questions, I think, even if like, I think most of the people who do this kind of stuff, even if they're a minority, I think most of the people will do this, even if they don't have any support or anything. And I think that passion is quite remarkable, in the sense that even if any adversity happens, they have this will to face up to suffering. It's kind of like it kind of relates to the concept of the übermensch, right? It's not exactly the concept of übermensch, but still it kind of relates to how you surpass suffering, in the sense that you accept it, and in the same sense you move forward regardless of it. Yeah.
No, I completely agree. There's definitely something to that. And I think that's like, if we want to kind of like circle back to absurdism, like that's a big part of it. Again, like kind of pursuing that passion, even though you know that, you know, like it might not get you anywhere, or you might not ever find the answer, but it's still like there's something beautiful in like people who are willing to pursue that, even though it goes against you know, maybe like societal expectations, or like other people don't see the value in it.
Yeah. And like I agree with that, you know, in the sense that it is quite interesting to see this phenomenon, because in the sense that, like, even if you take science, for example, right? Even if you take science, there are the most of the people who work with science are in it for knowing the truth, even though we may disagree whether the scientific method is false or true. They are in it for the same thing, right? They are passionate about finding the truth and all that. And I think it's quite interesting. Yeah. So it's like 1 hour. So it's kind of reached the mark of the podcast. Yeah. So I definitely think it was very interesting to have this conversation with you. It was quite nice, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I made sense for most of it. Like
yeah. That's quite interesting. Yeah. And I think, what do you feel about this? Like, what are your final thoughts to conclude, you know, about this conversation in general?
Yeah, no, it was really good. I really enjoyed it. And I'm honestly very happy that there are young people who are interested in, you know, like really diving into philosophy and asking these questions, like in their pursuit for truth. Like that's really all I'm about, is trying to help people get into this and ask these questions and be critical about their existence. So the fact you're doing this is amazing, and I'm thrilled that you, like, you know, wanted me to beyond this. And I guess as final thoughts go, like, I guess touching on absurdism again, like, and I say this a lot on Instagram in my stories, and I repeat myself only because for me that always worked as a teaching method. You know, it kind of like instills things in you, or kind of helps you to accept it. But even though like existence can be like meaningless and scary and like everything, like it's also liberating, it's empowering. Like the fact that we are all here in existence, like we are all here in the same point in time, like you're on the other side of the world from me, but we are here in existence together, like having this like moment in time, like connecting and sharing our ideas. And even though it is ultimately like meaningless, it's also very beautiful. Like when you kind of can go through existence with this, like deciding that even though if things are fundamentally meaningless, like still pursuing your passion and endeavoring to make an impact or, like spread whatever it is you have to offer. Like that is something that is meaningful, even if there is no meaning.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think that correctly defines what absurdism stands for, because like it is in accepting that kind of contradiction, right? That absurdism
Yeah,
lies.
it's that contradiction of us like trying to seek meaning, but realizing that there is none, and living in spite of that, like not falling into nihilism. And I won't take up too much more time, but I do want to say, like, nihilism does happen. It's more of a cyclical thing. Like sometimes, even if you are embracing the absurd, even if you are like, going through existence and like really thriving in the absurdity, sometimes you do fall back into nihilism. Like it's all cyclical at the end of the day. It's just being able to identify it and catch yourself and find your way back out of that again.
I do agree. Even existentialists can fall into this trap of nihilism, and I do think that nihilism is fundamentally a very, what do you call? It is not a good ideology to follow for me personally. I believe that it is quite deceitful and
Yes.
resentful of things, right? You have this sort of hatred towards things being this way, and there are people who follow the stuff like optimistic nihilism and all that stuff, but for the most part I think it is a very bad trap to fall into, so to speak. Yeah.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, so yeah, it was definitely fun talking to you, Katie. It was like I really enjoyed this conversation because and I think this is going to be a good addition to the it is definitely better. It's much better than the previous episode. It's like, yeah, it is like quite better than the previous episode, because previous episode I didn't know what I was doing, personally speaking. Yeah,
That's okay. I mean, most of the time I go through existence like not knowing what I'm doing either. So
yeah, so it's like a much better episode, and I'm quite grateful for you for making that happen.
yeah. Well, thanks so much for inviting me, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you too. Like it's night
Take
there
care.
though. Yeah, take care. Bye.
Yeah. Good night. Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye.